Hey boos and ghouls out there in YouTube land, this is Jen. And in tonight's review, we are going back to that dark, crawly crypt. I'm finally getting back to my Tales from the Crypt retrospective. And in tonight's review, we're going to be reviewing the final episode of the first season called Collection Completed. And boy, do I have some thoughts on this particular episode. So if you guys want to hear those thoughts, well then, stick around.
How much is that dog in the window?
So, if anyone's been wondering, when the hell is she going to get back to the Tales from the Crypt retrospective? Why hasn't she been doing the reviews for the Tales from the Crypt retrospective? It's a very simple answer. I have been dragging my feet because of this particular episode. I've always been a huge fan of Tales from the Crypt series. I love practically every episode. There's very few bad episodes. In fact, there's hardly any, except this one. And to be fair, I want to state unequivocally that this is not a bad episode in and of itself. It's just for this particular viewer, it's not a pleasant one. I think the best way to start out this review is to give a warning to all animal lovers out there. If you're an animal lover or a big fucking softie, this one might get under your skin a little bit. And it's not particularly graphic or gory. It's nothing like that. It's just this one has kind of a really, it always leaves me feeling weird, and that is why I haven't been getting back to the Tales from the Crypt retrospective, is because I really didn't want to do this particular episode and talk about it, because believe it or not, guys, while I love to do the performative ranty ravey with some of my reviews, I don't like to be fucking negative. And there's some praises for this episode. To be fair, there are a lot of praises for this episode. It is not a bad episode in and of itself. It just, for me, this is the one episode that I always pass on. I've only watched this episode like maybe 3 or 4 times in my whole life. Initially, and then the couple of times I needed to do it for research or for review purposes, or that's the only time I ever come back to Collection Completed. Which is interesting, because do you guys know who's in the director's chair for this one? I'm sure most of you do. It's Mary Lambert herself. And for longtime viewers, I know some of you guys who've been around for a while know that Pet Sematary is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. Like, that one is above and beyond all the others. There's a very special place in my heart with that movie. I think it's one of the best Stephen King adaptations that's ever been done. I know some people give it shit and think the acting's a little over the top, and some people don't particularly care for Dale Metcalf, and there's a lot of other reasons, and it's been parodied to death. But for me personally, I don't think there's ever a better film than Pet Sematary. And so you would think that the director who did that and is directing a Tales from the Crypt episode, I would be all over that shit. And it's interesting too, because this has a lot of, it doesn't exactly have the same themes as Pet Sematary, but we are dealing with animals in this particular episode, just like we were dealing with animals in Pet Sematary, and animal deaths, funnily enough. In fact, Mary Lambert, I think this was the next thing she did right after she directed Pet Sematary, which makes you want to pose the question, what the hell does Mary Lambert have against cats? What do her and Stephen King have against cats? Because there is a pussy in peril in this particular episode too. That's why I have not trying to get a little bit on track here. That is why it has taken so long to get back to it. I haven't been in a good place mentally, guys, and I just was dragging my feet. But I really do want to talk about some of the episodes. I think probably season 2 has some of my favorite episodes in the whole series of Tales from the Crypt, and I can't get to season 2 without finishing the last episode of season 1. I thought about it. I thought about just jumping and like hoping none of you guys would notice, but I'm sure some of you guys would notice, and it's not fair to just skip an episode because it's not my cup of tea, and I will try to be fair to this episode. So let's get on with some of my praises for this episode. While this wasn't my cup of tea, one of my biggest praises for this episode is the fucking casting. Very small cast. There's really only 3 people aside from the animals in this particular episode, and they all play their parts to perfection. And let's start with Emmett Walsh, who was a legendary character actor, and you've seen him. If you've ever needed a character actor to do the cantankerous, curmudgeon, just grumpy sourpuss character, Emmett Walsh was your guy. Probably us horror fans would know him the best from Critters, but he had a long and distinguished career. In fact, one of the interesting things about this is I thought he had passed a long time ago, but doing research for this particular review, found out that he passed in 2024. So he was working in the business up until his death. He's a great character actor. He was very good at playing this very cantankerous, grumpy old grouch, and that's what this role calls in this particular episode, and he plays it to perfection. And what his character is he is a retiree, and he basically never has been home his whole life. He basically just goes to his house to sleep, and then he gets up, showers, and goes to work. And when we meet him, he has his name is Jonas. He is right on the verge of his retirement, and he's going to come home to his wife and spend some time with her and enjoy his golden years. But because this is a Tales from the Crypt episode, that's not quite how it plays out. And playing his lovable but maybe just a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puff's wife in this episode is Audrey Lidley. I'm probably totally butchering her name. And now she did pass quite a while back. She passed in 1997. But she was a very noted character actress in her own right. And probably she did do a little bit of horror. She was in The Relic, and she also was in the TV show Three's Company. But where I know her from was from a little movie called Spellbinder from 1988. And why I say it's such perfect casting for her, because in that movie she plays someone who is completely off the deep end, but she's cruel and mean in that movie. In this episode, she's someone who's a little off the deep end. You can tell that the lights are on, but not all of them are shining completely bright. But she's very sweet and very loving and has a tender heart, and a little ditzy. And her and Emmett Walsh just play off each other so well, and you can really believe they're this retired couple. And another fun fact about this episode is while they really look the part, she was actually 17 years older than Emmett Walsh in real life, and you can't really tell it from this episode, but she was quite a bit older than him in this episode. I just found that interesting because if you were to put a gun to my head, I would think that Emmett Walsh was probably the older one of the two. But doing research, no, I found out she was actually 17 years older than him when they were doing this episode, and I just thought that was kind of a fun, cool fact. Rounding out this cast is Martin Garner, and now he was, horror fans will definitely know him from the Twilight Zone movie, but Jen knows him, and this has nothing to do with horror, but as some longtime viewers might know, I'm a Night Court nerd, and that's where I know this particular, all of these guys are great character actors, and he was a legendary character actor too, and I knew him as Bernie on Night Court. He was he sold concessions at the courthouse, and he was in love with Selma and always trying to get a date, and he had a very distinctive voice. And in this episode, he plays the sweet neighbor that you think to yourself, she should have really married this guy, but somewhat nosy neighbor, but a sweet neighbor nonetheless. And that's all of the cast other than the animals. And again, that is my biggest praise for this particular episode, is that everybody gets their parts down really well. The neighbor is sweet, a little nosy. Well, we have the not all there but very sweet wife, and we have the grouchy curmudgeon, and they all play their parts to perfection. Where this episode fails for me is that this is a very much a black comedy. This is very much darkly comedic in this tone, and the tone doesn't work because, as I said earlier, we are dealing with a lot of animal death. And again, maybe Jen is just a little bit of a baby bitch here, but I am one of those horror fans that, yeah, I can see somebody get decapitated. I watch necrophilia films. I've seen Nazi films. I mean, as depraved and sick and as hard-edged as we can go, I'm there and I'm usually happy. But the one caveat for me where I turn into a little baby bitch is if there's an animal getting hurt. Like, I'm one of these ones, I can be going, wee, look, Marty, they're taking out her eye, and look, they're gonna screw the eye socket. Ooh, wee, yeah. And then, but whenever I see something that has with an animal, I'm like, oh my God, they killed the doggy. No, they killed the doggy. That is basically the kind of horror fan I am. There was, not to get too sidetracked here, but just to kind of show you guys how bad I am, there was a movie that I reviewed called Hounds of Love, which is a phenomenal movie, but has a very brutal scene with a dog getting stomped to death, and it is not a quick scene, and you hear like the boots just going on on this poor animal, and you hear the boots going into the flesh, and you hear the whimpering and the crying, and it's just a horrific scene, and it goes on for a long time. And a good friend of mine, the Cadaver Club, Ben, we talk about that film quite a lot because we both really appreciate the musical choices in that. And when I was talking to Ben about it, I'm like, I'm such a fake horror fan, Ben. I watched it once and I got so upset I couldn't hardly sleep. And he's like, Jen, I just fast forward through that scene. And Ben's a guy, so that made me feel good that I at least watched the scene. But it really, whenever there's an animal death, it really psychologically bothers me and disturbs me. And like I said, this particular episode is not graphic, but what this episode basically is about is, like I said, this man is coming home the night of his retirement, and he doesn't really know his wife, and he's never really been around to begin with. And his wife, in his absence, has made all the animals, all the strays, cats, dogs, birds, anything you can think of, as her pets, as her friends. And like I said, Emmett Walsh is just a fucking sourpuss, and he doesn't really like being at home, and he hates animals. And it doesn't help that, like, they're all around. They get on his chair. His wife will fix the steak. He comes downstairs and he and his wife is fixing a steak, and the scent is wafting through the house, and he kind of perks up and he's like, okay, maybe there's something to retirement after all. And you find out that she's making the steak not for him but for the dog, and it just goes on from there. And she treats him, she gives him aspirin, and instead of just giving him aspirin in a glass of water to swallow it down with, she hides it in a brownie, like you would do for a pet, hide it in its food. And just as the time goes on, he just gets more and more angry. And we get, like I said, Martin Garner keeps coming in and out as this neighbor, and he's like, you gotta enjoy your retirement. And he's like, my wife and these goddamn animals are driving me insane. And Martin Garner's like, come on, buddy, you gotta enjoy your retirement. You gotta let the days pass, and you gotta enjoy it, and you gotta find a hobby. And that's where the light comes out on, is because when he decides to try to find what a passion of his would be and what a good hobby would be for him. And what his hobby turns out to be is taxidermy. He figures that he can get rid of these animals. His wife will still have these animals, but they won't be such a nuisance and a bother. And again, it's very done over the top performances in the best way possible. These actors, I feel, were having a lot of fun working together. But it just, for some reason, this comedic tone does doesn't work. And like I said, one of the animals that he, kills and taxidermies is this adorable bulldog. In fact, the bulldog's name is Jonas. She names him after her husband. And when you finally see, when she realizes her pets are going missing and he reveals what he's been doing, that he's taken up taxidermy, you see the bulldog in the shadows, and it looks very, very fake. Like it's a robot bulldog and he's put eyes in that blinks it on and off. And it's over the top and very silly, and I can see some people getting kind of a hoot and a holler over it, but I just don't like it. Also, I have a pet bulldog, so like even though it's none of the animals were really harmed in this episode, it just leaves me feeling ick. It's just one, guys, and again, maybe I am a fake baby bitch horror fan, but I don't like it. There's just something about this episode that I just don't like. But again, I'm trying not to be too negative, so I do appreciate Emmett Walsh before he gets his grand idea of starting to doing taxidermy to all of his wife's pets. He does get angry with his wife, and he goes, because she's basically treating him like one of her pets, and he goes, I am not an animal, I am a human being. And I really did, and the way he delivers it was stellar. And I also appreciated the Elephant Man reference. Even as a kid, I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But this tone doesn't work. And I've heard other horror fans say that this is a very funny episode. And I can see for some of you guys the humor. And then after we get to the bulldog scene, he takes her down to the basement. And the other animals do look a lot realer. The bulldog looks very fake, but the other animals that he's killed, they do look real. And she's like, where's my baby? She has this cat, and he goes, oh, he's around somewhere, and he pulls out the cat, and the cat is still alive. And again, with Tales from the Crypt, we know where this story is going long before we ever got to the beginning. Pretty much from the beginning of the episode, we kind of can tell how this is going to play out. And she goes, you are not gonna touch that cat. You're not gonna kill that cat. And she gets this hammer that he got when he retired after 45 years, this very heavy golden hammer, and she bashes him over the head with the hammer. And the other thing that's interesting about this, because it's been very kind of over the top and very comedic until this point, but right when she's lunging at him and getting him ready to bash his head in with the hammer, he looks surprised, like he's murdered all of her pets, which are to this woman is like her children. So he goes, what are you doing? Wait a minute. And he looks generally surprised, like he's a bastard, but I would think he would know, showing her all of her children basically being murdered and then, not reincarnated, but kind of reincarnated, like they're being kind of brought back to life. Their bodies are being preserved anyway. And he kind of doesn't understand why. That bothers me too, and I don't exactly know why. Now, we can say that the ending, and I'm going to spoil the ending because I'm sure most of you guys have seen this, but the ending does give a very good comeuppance, because after she bashes him in the head with the hammer, you see her sitting on the couch and he's in his armchair, and she's like, you love Lassie, don't you? Which again, admittedly, is kind of funny that she would be watching an old episode of Lassie. The camera pans to him and you see that he has been taxidermied and his eyes are all budged out. You can see that he's starting to somewhat decompose, and he has the cat that he was going to kill on his lap, and the cat is just purring. She's like, I like you so much better like this. You finally learned how to slow down. And then we have the neighbor drop in one more time asking how Jonas is doing, and the wife is like, oh, he's just fine. He's really learned how to appreciate retirement and how to slow down. And that's the end of the episode. You pan onto his face and see that she taxidermied him. I can see some Tales from the Crypt fans. I mean, it is very much classic Tales from the Crypt. You know, the person that deserves it gets their just desserts in the end. The evildoers usually do get their just desserts. And this guy, if there was ever a Tales from the Crypt villain that ever had it coming, I would say it was Jonas. And again, they don't do, Mary Lambert doesn't go for the gore and effects or anything. And like I said, when you see the bulldog, it's very, I can see some people go, it's too comical almost. But when he takes her to the basement and you see that he's murdered some of her other dogs and cats and other little critters, those do look a little bit more real. And it just, I'm okay. I don't know what this says about me psychologically, guys. I'm okay that, like, people getting beheaded and things like that. But whenever it's an animal in peril, it just really upsets me. Whether it's something brutal like Hounds of Love, or even done very much more in a dark comedic tongue-in-cheek way like Collection Completed did, like Mary Lambert did in this episode. And this is a great cast, and I can see why some people would really dig it, but this is one that I'm going to have to give 2 ratings. Personally, for me, this is a D-. Like, I give it credit for the performances, but I just don't like this episode. But for trying to be a little bit more of a critic, the critic in me, I can give this a B-. I think there are going to be a lot of people out there who will enjoy the tongue-in-cheek humor and the performances, especially if you like, because these actors were kind of older when this episode came out, and now in 2026, it's they're considered probably, you know, they should be on TMC or something. So I can see that some people would really appreciate it for the actors that are in this episode, and for the direction from Mary Lambert and the dark comedic tone, and that's all great, and I can totally understand why some people would really dig it. But for me, this is my least favorite episode, and I am so glad that I finally filmed it. I don't know if this is a particularly good review or not, but if it does see the light of day, I'm just glad. And now we can move on from season 1 and dive into season 2, which, as I said earlier, has some of my favorite episodes in the whole series. Yeah, I think that is all I have to say about Collection Completed. I hope I didn't go too off the rails in this episode. I hoped I was fair, even though, like I said, I can see why some people would really dig it, but for me, this is just my least favorite one of the whole series. But I did try to be fair, guys. And with all that said, I hope you've enjoyed listening to my rambly bullshit. As always, I love you guys. Remember to always keep watching and talking horror, and I'll see you guys real soon, and I'll be back with another episode from Tales from the Crypt. We'll be starting the 2nd season of Tales from the Crypt. And speaking of season 2, never fear, Boos and Ghouls, because while I really dragged my feet on the last episode of season 1, because it was my least favorite episode of Tales from the Crypt, but good news, kids, because we are jumping from my least favorite to, it's not my favorite episode of Tales from the Crypt, but it's probably in my top fucking 3, if not my top fucking 5. So please join me when I review the next episode of Tales from the Crypt, which is the first episode of season 2, called Dead Right, with Deneen Moore and Jeffrey Tambor. And as much as I disliked Collection Complete, it's almost the same levels of how much I love Dead Right. So tune in next time, kiddies, because we're gonna have a lot of fun with that episode, and Jen won't be such a little baby bitch in that episode. So I'll see you guys real soon. I love you guys, and thank you always for watching. And again, remember, always keep watching and talking horror. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.